Today on CyberBytes, I'm joined by Alex Salazar, former product leader at Okta and now founder of Arcade. Alex spotted a huge gap in AI security when he saw a bank engineer paste an authorization token straight into an agent, proving there's still no zero auth for AI agents. Arcade is building that missing authorization layer, enforcing delegated access across enterprise systems and making MCP truly enterprise ready. We get into the pivot, the aha moments, and why the problem is now exploding. Enjoy. All right, and we're live. So, welcome to CyberBytes, the podcast. It's a pleasure to have Alex today, who is the co-founder and CEO over Arcade. Great to have you, Alex. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And you're in the lovely world of the US and then specifically SF, right?
Yes, sir. Sitting in San Francisco, lovely weather today in late November. So
I'm jealous.
great time to visit.
Yeah, I'll be there actually in January, so hopefully we'll get a chance to connect then. But anyway, the way I like to start these podcasts and episodes, Alex, is to I guess rewind the clock. And for those that maybe don't know who you are yet, can you just give a quick intro to yourself and also Arcade as well?
Yeah, so I'm the CEO, co-founder of Arcade, and you can think of us like an MCP runtime. We make it possible for an agent to connect to other services like a CRM, an email system, internal systems, properly authenticated and authorized, so that we can so we can assert, can this agent connect to this system on behalf of this user and perform this action? And we provide a number of other things to make sure that all of these tool calls, what they call them, are highly accurate, because the number one performance metric of an agent is accuracy. Did it do the right thing when prompted properly? My background prior to starting this company, I was the VP of products for Okta for the developer-facing products, and then the general manager and VP of all new products. Prior to that, I was a CEO, co-founder of a company called Stormpath, which is an authentication API for developers. So
Mm.
back in the cloud days, if you were building an application and you needed auth or login or anything like that, you would plug us in, and it was all out of the box. Okta ultimately acquired that business and then later acquired our direct competitor, Auth0 as well.
Nice. Yeah, thank you for that. And so MCP, I've been hearing a lot about it. Like it's particularly over the last, I don't know, even the last 3 to 6 months. Why is that? Why is it so important? Why should people know about
Yeah, because I think everybody's gotten over chatbots.
it?
You know, Everybody was very wowed when you could talk to ChatGPT and have you write you an email or draft you a fun poem or give you advice or guidance.
Mm,
And the first wave of AI-based applications were co-pilots, were there to, you know, tell you what to do or share knowledge or, some version of search, something like that. But very quickly, people realized that they wanted more. And businesses in particular wanted return on investment for all the AI investments they're making. And so what people really wanted is they wanted AI agents to take actions. They wanted it to go access the systems that they have access to. They wanted it to read information from other systems, but more importantly, they wanted it to manipulate or change data or take action in other systems. You don't want it to just draft the email for you. You want it to send the email. And there really was no way to do that up until about a year ago in agents. And then a new protocol came out called MCP, otherwise known as Model Context Protocol, that was the way that everybody agreed we were going to have, large language models and agents interact with the outside world.
mhm.
And so that became huge. Everybody got very, very excited, and probably one of the fastest adopted protocols that I can think of in history. But it became all the rage very, very quickly. And I think it's having its 1 year anniversary today.
There you go. Yeah, because we were discussing before. That's meant to be a release, right? That's coming
Yeah.
out today. Yeah, it's interesting times and very exciting at the same time. And with Arcade, so you obviously had the background as a CEO, founder prior to this, and through successful acquisition, stayed on with Okta, very exciting. Why Arcade? Why now? Was it kind of I guess we somewhat answered it with the hype of what's happening, but was there a moment there?
Yeah, no, there was actually. We did not intend to start Arcade. as is currently operating. The original product we were trying to build was an agent itself, a site
Okay.
reliability agent. So, if a server went down, our AI agent would go help you figure out why the server crashed or why the server had high latency.
Mm,
And the way that that agent was going to work is it would go do a bunch of diagnostics. Now, if you think of a diagnostic flow, for anything, whether it's a server or a person, there's a series of questions and there's a workflow of questions. Hey, do they have a fever? Can they eat? Do their joints ache? And you just kind of go through these sets of questions, and then depending on what the answers are, you ultimately get to more questions, and then eventually you get to diagnosis. Well, in the way large language models work, every one of those questions is a call to the large language model. But large language models are probabilistic, right? If you ask them 10 questions, if you ask them a question like 100 times,
mm,
you're going to get possibly like 100 different answers. There's an infinite number of correct answers, an infinite number of incorrect answers, an infinite number of kind of in the middle of maybe. And that's very different than the way most software operates historically, which is, you give it the question 100 times and you're going to get 100 of the exact same answers.
sure.
And because it's probabilistic versus deterministic. People in the AI world call it non-determinism versus determinism. And so if you think of all the questions you would need to go through to diagnose why a server went down, you're calling a large language model a lot. And it's a chain. And so if any one of those goes wrong, the whole thing fails. The other problem we ran into was we had to go access a bunch of different systems. How do we know if a server is, why a server went down? Well, we have to go check all these different services. But to do that, we had to give ourselves like super user access, which means like God level access to all these systems. And no one is going to let that actually happen for real in
Sure.
production.
Yeah.
And so we couldn't get our product to work. And out of desperation, we invented something. We ultimately separated out all of this logic from the agent into what we call the tool execution layer. So we separated the brains, which is the large language model, and the agent from the hands. And so we created this whole layer that was just hands. And when we did that, that whole layer was what we call deterministic. It
Sure.
was not probabilistic. It didn't use any models. And by separating that, all of a sudden, everything started to work. We were able to do really complex operations without errors. But more importantly, we were able to go through security flows like authentication and authorization to make sure that the agent could have what's called scoped access. So if I was going to access a system, I was doing it not as a God level access, but through properly scoped, user-based access. And when we got all that working, the agent worked. And people were marveled by this fact that this agent could do everything we were showing them.
Mm,
Nobody wanted to buy the agent, though. What people were more excited about was how the hell did you actually get that to work?
yeah.
And it took a few calls for us to really get smart. And then finally we realized, oh, what if we just stop talking about the agent and start showing people just this thing that we invented? And when we did that, people got very excited because they couldn't understand how we did it. And in particular, there was this one bank that we showed it to. And right before we showed them a demo, they had told us that there was no way that it could possibly be done. They had investigated and tried everything. And as a result, their agents were not going to production, a very common problem. And when we showed them the demo, the guy fell out of his chair and he was like, when can you talk to my manager? And so that
Love it.
became the product we have now.
Yeah, the aha moment, as they say. Yeah,
Yeah.
and rewinding to the previous startup, so you obviously
Mhm.
had a successful exit or acquisition via Okta. Um, what are maybe some of like the practical learnings from that one, or advice that you've taken with you now into Arcade? Is there maybe like one or two things that stand out for you from that journey?
Oh yeah, there's two really big ones. Well, one I joke, I live in San Francisco, so everybody here is a founder.
Yeah.
Kind of like in Los Angeles, everyone's an actor. Same thing here. And so, I joke with everybody, it'd be so much easier if every founder started life as a second time founder, because there's just so many things you learn the first time around that just aren't in books.
Mm,
And you just have to go through them through the hard way in order to really pick up the lessons. So with that, there were two things that struck me as I started this one. The first one was um, we did we did very little software development, very little coding. We didn't hire anybody, just me and my co-founder,
Oh wow.
until we had people trying to tear the product concept out of our hands. And so in the very early days of this agent for idea that we had, we were originally giving people completely fake demos, right? Demos that there was no code behind them. You know, they were PowerPoint or Figma, and we were telling people they were real to see if they would buy it.
Okay.
And that's very unintuitive because you get worried that if someone says yes, well, what do you do?
Mm.
The problem is, first time founder versus second time founder. Second time founder, you realize that the chances of someone saying yes are exceedingly low in your concepts. And so you have to iterate a ton in order to get people to finally say yes. And so if you've written code, if you've built stuff, changing what it is between meetings, it becomes very difficult, right?
Mm.
You have to go change a bunch of source code. But if it's just Figma and PowerPoints, then you can change it in 2 seconds. You can be an entirely different company from one day to the next
Yeah.
if you need it. And so that made us very agile in the early days as we were trying to figure out what the world really was going to get excited about that we were putting out to people.
Mm.
The second thing that was really critical is, now this is maybe more specific to the world that I live in. I really like what people call infrastructure or the plumbing part of the software world. The stuff that's very boring that the consumer never really sees. You're selling to the developers who are ultimately building the cool applications. And so in that world, my North Star has always been, but now I'm more religious about it, is that it has to be black magic.
Mm.
Like I have to deliver something that you don't even know how I did it, because anything short of that gets too easy for someone to compete with you. And
Yeah.
then you wake up a year later and you've got 30-some competitors that can all do the same thing.
Yeah.
But if you really focus on delivering something that is truly black magic, then you've got a long leeway. You will still get competitors, but they're going to be mostly copying what you did and how you did it. And that's a lot harder to do. It takes a lot longer versus just 9 people having the same idea separately.
Yeah.
And that ended up being true for us.
Yeah. It's interesting because the last point you make, I'm thinking of spaces in security like AI SOC, for example. There's just like a ton of vendors that have popped up there. And even in just vendors trying to tackle MCP, like it's probably a part of the problem. There's tons that
Yeah,
are just popping up here, right? And it kind of
yeah,
ties into that point. You need that almost be a little bit secretive, that
yeah. Oh, well, I think that's a great example. Like, in the true MCP category, I mean, there's a million vendors at this point. But because of this black magic issue, we stand unique because we can still today do things that they have no idea how to do, right?
yeah,
We can do proper end user-based user authorization, delegate it properly. We're not just, service accounts or non-human identity. Those are the easy ones.
yeah,
We can do the really hard ones. We can deliver, 500 tools,
yeah.
with really high accuracy while only having the customer handle a certain amount of tokens.
Mm,
Other people don't know how to do that, and we know how to do it with low
interesting.
latency.
Yeah,
And so we can all say MCP, we can all say things like gateway and runtime, but no one can deliver feature sets we have, largely because we put so much time into breakthrough tech.
yeah. And out of interest, when you're selling the tech, does that make your life easier or harder that you've got folks that are claiming they can do X, Y, and Z, but truly, as you say, you've got these unique differentiators under the hood? Like, how, how does that
Yeah.
how does that work?
Yeah, it's a balance, right? It's on one hand, it means there are more people spending money to more vendors spending money to educate the market and elevate the category, right?
Yeah,
And so they're all doing me a favor by, by just branding the category more.
sure.
So thank you, right? Um, uh, and then in customer calls, yeah, it comes up a little bit where I have to explain the difference, but the way that we go about it is I just give you a demo, because like no matter what, we know what everyone else can do. which is all basically just like run-of-the-mill MCP hosting, or MCP gatewaying, which is like itself on its own not terribly valuable. And so everybody kind of understands what that looks like because they've seen like 9 of them. But when we show them what we can do, like lights out, right? Conversation's over.
Yeah.
And so our typical sales call is kind of the inverse of what most people think it would be, right? Most sales calls are, sales guy shows up and asks you a ton of questions and starts telling you why their product. They pull up a deck and, 20 minutes later, like, maybe they show you a demo. We jump to the demo within like 5 minutes.
Nice.
And the customer's either wowed or they're not. And if they're not wowed, we all move on and everybody's busy. And if the customer's wowed, great. We proceed with the conversation and work towards a deployment.
Yeah, love it. And where are you guys at as a business today? So give everyone like a high level if they don't know too much about Arcade, because it's still a relatively new business, right?
Yeah. So, man, we are about almost 2 years old, which is wild.
Where
And
does that
almost
time
2 years
go?
old. Yeah, almost 2 years old in AI is, it's like it feels like we're like 10 years old. So, we're about a little under 2 years old. The product itself that we have today itself is only about a year and a half old. And we're fully GA'd. We're in production at a number of organizations. And I would say about half of our user base is Fortune 2000, so large
Okay.
organizations.
Yeah.
And the industries are a smattering of what you'd expect, banking, financials, healthcare, tech companies, retail. We have a beverage company. So it's pretty horizontal from that perspective.
Yeah, makes sense. And in terms of like the future of this space, so it's relatively new, right, as we've discussed, and there's a lot of moving parts. So, and probably after this conversation with the updates, some more moving parts to add to that. But do you have a prediction on what maybe the next 6, 12 months beyond look like from the conversations that you're having with customers and what you're seeing?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's living in San Francisco is very valuable because we're in ground zero. We get to hear the conversation being had
Sure.
by the people like us, the technologists that are driving AI forward at a foundational level.
Mm,
But it's also a bit of an echo chamber because we are not our own customers. And so, the customers of AI live in New York, Chicago, London, Dallas. And so it's very interesting in AI because there's everything that the tech community, the vendors believe to be true and are driving towards. And then there's what the customer or the industry believes to be true and trying to drive towards. And they're not exactly fully aligned. And so what I think is coming, and which is kind of the intersection of the two, what will be released and what will be adopted. I think MCP is on a tear, but take the spec out of it because there's a lot of debate people are having about whether it's MCP or some other spec or whatever. We're big believers in MCP. I'll take the MCP side of that debate, but take the debate out of it altogether. Every organization is trying to deploy AI agents at an extremely fast rate across as many use cases as possible, largely for internal productivity. And let's call it 60%. And 40% is customer-facing experiences. For the internal stuff, the only way you get ROI is by doing workflow automation. And so almost everything we're watching is people are trying to deploy agents to automate workflows that are just really expensive or too slow or couldn't be automated before.
Yeah.
And so MCP is, or some protocol like it that allows you to talk to other services is right now the biggest thing, the most important thing for these organizations, and that'll continue to accelerate. So right now, where people are just starting to hear about it, my bet is that within a year, everybody's standardized on it.
Yeah.
This protocol or another one. What's also coming is that people are quickly realizing that large language models can only take so much context before things start breaking. And so there's this whole wave of innovation that we ourselves are leading, and as are others, to try and figure out how to give a large language model enormous amount of tools while not blowing the context windows. And there's a lot of techniques that are emerging, like progressive disclosure and tool search and et cetera, to make this work. It's still early, but my suspicion is that within the next 6 months, there's a really clear standard way of doing this. And everybody is kind of unshackled by the limitations on the number of tools they can have. And then I think memory is going to be a big deal. I mean, memory is already a big challenge. A lot of people are already starting to solve memory in different ways. And I think that is going to be a bit more refined over the next 6 months.
Yeah, and to your first point, because I spoke to a few people, a lot of VCs actually recently, and they're looking into this space, and a few have said it's like it feels too early for them to kind of make that bet. What would you typically say to that if someone's saying, is it too early? What's your kind of counter argument?
You know, it's hard being a venture capitalist. You know, I have a lot of opinions on this matter. So yeah, it's so many things are always going to feel too early. But there's no, you know, how do you measure that? And the only way you measure it is you look backwards. And so if it's obviously no longer too early, that means it's already too late, and you kind of miss the window. The companies that win in different categories were the ones that had the right product for the right buyer at the right time, which means they were there like almost first. Now there might be people who were there before them, but they had the wrong combination of product, buyer, timing. And so the name of the game is you have to be early. It's better to be too early than late. Because if, for example, in our category of running and securing and making sure it's production grade MCP servers, if you showed up today, there's no way you could win, right? Like between us and all the other people who have now entered the market, you're going to be at least 18 months behind from a standing start. And there's really no amount of marketing capital or, like brute force engineering that's going to have you catch up, because it's not only the technology that you have to go implement to catch up, but there's also all of like the little micro learnings of how do you message it, who do you call on, what's the right ICP and target buyer, what's the right price, how do you close a deal. Like there's just all of these compounding insights that you also have to catch up on, and you can't really buy your way out of them. So that's one argument. The other argument is, from what we see in large organizations, they are investing actively. I have not yet met a large organization with over 1,000 employees that doesn't already have a fully staffed AI building team.
Interesting. Okay.
Zero. And they're already building, they're already budgeted. Many of them have already deployed at least one agent. There's one bank that we talked to that has 18 different teams staffed and budgeted to go build this stuff. And so the budgets are there, the budgets are being spent. I don't know what else anybody's waiting for. And the argument then becomes, well, not enough people are going to production. That is true. And so the biggest problem right now in AI agents is that most agent projects are failing. And there's a number of reasons why that's happening. One of them is they can't get a high enough accuracy. The agent just can't be good enough to be trusted. That's one. The other problem is the token costs are just way too high, right? The agent model is just communicating with a large language model way too much, and it undermines the financial ROI of the business. And then the third one is the CISO has to kill it, right? There's no way for that agent to prove that it's accessing information on behalf of a user the right way and not leaking information. Vendors like us solve much of that. There are other vendors as well that come in and solve pieces of that. I would argue that today it's possible, quite possible, to build a high accuracy, cost-effective agent with really tight access controls. People just need to discover the right combination of tools, and we're one of them. But that problem is a reflection of the investments. Like most agents aren't going to production because there's a bottleneck that's being cleared by vendors like us and LangChain and OpenAI and Anthropic. But that bottleneck exists because the investment is so extraordinary going in. And so as this bottleneck's getting removed by us and others, all of that investment is going to be hitting production
Yeah.
very soon. Like already we're seeing a lot of agents just starting to hit production, and most people don't fully appreciate how much everything has already changed and how much change is coming over the next 6 months for a variety of different products and services that they use every day.
Yeah. And I feel like particularly now, I think we're at that inflection point where the next 6 months and 12 months is just going to be is going to be crazy. As you describe, enterprise adoption and everything else that comes with it is going to, well, I think from the conversation I have, skyrocket. And it sounds like yeah, you're seeing the same.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I'll give you a really interesting anecdote. And if you were to survey, white collar professionals under the age of like 27 or 28, largely they get frustrated when they have to go point and click on a user interface. They expect it to be conversational.
Yeah.
That's a huge transition on a generational level of the software they expect. Now, that might sound shocking to most people, but most people listening here had a very similar experience with mobile and web,
Yeah.
right? At one point, you just expected everything to be a web or a mobile app. And that, while very natural to you, was shocking to the generation before you that was building software.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good analogy because it makes sense. And they're these evolutions because I've heard people frame MCP as like the API of the software era, right? And how that the API changed, what, 20, 15, 20 years, and versus how this is going to potentially change the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, I think that's the right way of looking at it. MCP, for people who are technical enough, like MCP is analogous, not the same as an API. And an API is how a traditional web or mobile application would talk to other services. And MCP in theory is the same thing. The difference is there's MCP done right, and then there's like MCP misunderstood. And MCP misunderstood is I'm going to go make it look like an API. I'm going to go wrap this API service with MCP and then call it a day. And that's not terribly valuable. In fact, that's why a lot of MCP deployments fail. You end up with a lot of security problems, you end up with a lot of accuracy problems. For an MCP server to be very successful, it's the inverse of an API. So think of an API like a service contract of how a downstream service works. So, Gmail has an API and explains how Gmail works. Well, your agent doesn't care about Gmail. It doesn't care about Google Drive. What it cares about is the user intention it's trying to automate. And so it's trying to send an email. It's trying to look for a sales brochure. And so a really well-built set of tools, MCP or not, are actually a service contract of how the agent works. Its intentions. That's the key word. They're intention-based. And so if you have a sales agent, it's looking for a brochure. Giving it a tool that is find brochure is going to be so much more valuable and powerful than giving it the Google Drive APIs or a Google Drive MCP server and say, figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of like in really simple terms, it's almost like a control layer where it's yeah, I need a sales brochure. Okay, it's going to give me a sales brochure, and it's controlling that piece. Obviously, there's more to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why in the enterprise, our functionality for governing MCP systems and other types of tools is so valuable to organizations is because it is the control point. In particular around access control, because now the organization can say, hey, I want to apply these rules. I want to apply this observability. I want to make sure that we have access control happening. And it's very easy and natural and elegant for that to happen at the MCP runtime layer versus trying to do that somewhere else. Because if you're trying to do it in the model or in the agent, then you're kind of relying on the agent to follow its guardrails, which itself is a bit of a roll of the dice. It might ignore it because it's against a probabilistic system, but it can't ignore it at the MCP runtime layer because there it's enshrined in code. right? And so it'll deterministically fail or not fail. And to give you an example, let's say you work at a bank. You can fantasize about robbing the bank all you want. Nobody cares. The moment you try to rob the bank, that's when everyone cares.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so similarly, at the agent large language model side, which is largely the brain, the reasoning, man, it can think about whatever it wants. It can
Yeah.
hallucinate all day long. And yeah, we don't love it, but it doesn't really matter until it tries to call a tool to take an action. That's the point at which any of that reasoning gone sideways really matters.
Mm,
And so we want to put all of our enforcement at that action layer because it's clean and it's safe and it's secure.
makes sense. Well, I know we're coming out to time, but Alex, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and thank you for talking everything AI agents and MCP. It's great to pick your brains on that. Is there anything you wanted to finish with before we wrap up? Or
Yeah, I would say that anybody who's listening to this call who is building agents, we'd love to talk to you and see if we can help you. If you want to build agents that can talk to other things and be more than a chatbot, we enable that. We make it possible.
there you go. Well, Alex is the man. Alex, yeah, pleasure to have you on. We'll talk soon.